There could not be a better place to begin a series on Hollywood history than the Musso and Frank Grill. Musso and Frank is Hollywood history. This sign has graced Hollywood Boulevard for decades, and the story goes back much further than that. So please join us while we have an exclusive tour of the Musso and Frank Grill.
Today we're at the iconic Musso and Frank restaurant on Hollywood Boulevard. Continuously in operation since 1919, and I'm joined today by the owner, Mark Echeverria, who's been kind enough to come in today on the only day the restaurant is closed, Monday, and give us a tour and talk to us about the history of the restaurant. So your family's owned the restaurant since?
1927.
Right, and you've owned it continuously since then?
Yep.
Okay.
It's been in the family ever since.
And remember, we're going to be able to edit things here.
And so everything in here is original from 1934, and another interesting little feature about this room and this booth that we are in particular is this used to be the Charlie Chaplin booth. Well, still is the Charlie Chaplin booth, but this is where Charlie Chaplin would always eat lunch. And the reason it was his booth is it's the only booth in the whole restaurant that has a window. And the legend says that him and Rudolph Valentino used to race their horses from his studio, which was down the street here. They used to race their horses, the loser would have to buy lunch. And so they'd race to Musso's, tie their horses out up front, and this is still when the boulevard was dirt. And they would tie their horses up front, and since this was the only booth that had a window, this became their booth. And when Charlie Chaplin moved back to France in the early 30s, and then carried on through until the 40s, we would never sit anybody in this booth until about 10 years later, I'd say about the mid-40s. We started sitting people in the booth again, knowing that Charlie Chaplin had moved on, but until then we never sat anybody in here. And it still is continually called the Charlie Chaplin booth, and it is by far the most requested booth in the restaurant.
And I want to point out that I've been coming here since 1967. This is the first time I've ever been in the booth. And also that they feature on the menu to this day lamb kidneys with bacon, because that was Chaplin's favorite lunch.
It was. So that's a little history of the old room, and then we had to, in 1955, we had to expand. The restaurant was growing, and so they had to expand, so they bought the property next door, and we opened up what is now called the new room. It's built in 1955, but it's new to Musso's. That's new to Musso's, it's 55. And when they built out that room, they made it a direct replica from an old cocktail bar that we had right next door and kind of towards the back of the restaurant. That was infamously referred to as the writer's room or the back room that they had in 1934 after Prohibition. And so when they built the new room, they made it a direct replica. And they also brought everything they could over from that old back room. So the chandeliers that we'll see when we do the walkthrough, a lot of the booths in there, the coat racks, but more importantly, the bar was originally from that old cocktail room, back room, writer's room, whatever you want to call it. So in 1955, they actually moved the bar over. And so it is still the bar that you can sit at the F. Scott Fitzgeralds, the Hemingways, Raymond Chandler, that those guys sat at and drank at and probably fell off of bar stools at many times. And so you can still sit there. And we still have a lot of writers today come in and get inspiration from just sitting at the bar that those guys sat in. And we see them writing novels, proofreading their novels still to this day, which is pretty miraculous.
I channel Chandler when I'm in there.
Good.
And you don't forget to mention the hat racks.
Yeah, the coat racks are also, you mean the ones here in the booth?
Yeah.
In the booth? What about them?
Well, just they're so unique that you brought them over from the other room.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
Not a lot of restaurants in the world that have hat racks anymore.
Right, that's very true. And so when they were designing out that new room, they wanted to carry over themes from both the old back cocktail room and this room. And one of those was the unique hat racks and coat racks. And so when we do the walkthrough, you'll see that in those booths along the wall in there, it's very similar to this, where there are coat racks that reside at each booth that people can come in and rest their hats and coats. And even though hats aren't really used today like they were back in the 40s and the 50s, People still use it for their coats, and people still come in when they come in the the early Hollywood regalia. They still use the hat racks as the old fedoras and whatnot.
I would love to do that.
Yeah.
Tell me about the book.
So the book is a book that we have of old house accounts. And so way back when, before credit cards, and restaurants and other industries had what's called charge accounts, where people they had a number, and they could come in and they could charge their meal to their charge account. And then at the end of every month, Musso's would bill out the account. And we still use that today. And looking back into the history of the restaurant, it looks like we opened that concept in probably the late 20s, and it still is being used today. And however, most of them have long passed. We still have about 15 active accounts. The oldest account number that's still active is number 215, and we are going to be at house account 1310 when we do yours today.
Thank you. I have been extended the honor of being put in the book. I've seen the book. It's right there. We can't show it to you because of legal concerns, but it is an amazing document of Hollywood history. I have looked at some of these pages in awe. If you can mention a couple of names, possibly.
Yeah.
I saw General Patton in there.
There is. General Patton is in here. Pretty much, you name any producer, director, writer, actor from the early 20s on through the 60s, and they're going to be in there. Our executive chef's father, who was a writer, director, and a producer, his house account's in there. It's number 951. His wife still uses it to this day. That's kind of a neat little story. There's Frank Sinatra in there. There's Marilyn Monroe in there, just to name a few. But there's 1,309 in there right now, and soon to be 1,310.
And I'm going to be in very good company. So how about giving us a tour?
Absolutely. Let's go.
Let's go.
Welcome to Musso and Frank. And so, as we were talking in the booth, this is the old room. And like I said, everything in here is original from 1934 when we built out the room, including the wallpaper, which was a little colored through time, but it's got Humphrey Bogart's cigar smoke up there. And I mean, what other restaurant can say that,
Cigarette smoke.
Cigarette smoke.
He wasn't a cigar man.
And so then all the wood is original. All these booths are original. We have had to change out the leather and the banquettes, of course. But this booth in particular was Marilyn Monroe. This is where she liked to sit. She was one of the stars that would come into Musso's that actually wanted to be seen. Musso's typically was a restaurant where the high-profile clientele could come and not be bothered. She always liked to be seen, so she wanted to sit towards the front of the restaurant where everybody could see her come in. And actually, the server who served Marilyn Monroe was a server named Luis Cortez, and he just retired about 3 years ago after 56 years of service here at the restaurant.
My first time at the restaurant when I was 12 years old, Louis was our server.
Excellent. Very old school classic. So this is the old room. And one other really important fixture that we should point out in this room is the first public telephone in Hollywood was in this restaurant. And this is it right here. First public telephone. And we're actually in the process right now of looking for some old phones that will do just local calls where people could actually come in and still use it as a working telephone booth.
I wonder who gave you that idea.
and actually,
and we still have the booth back here.
It would be interesting to tell you that I've seen 4 people get married in that booth.
That's amazing.
Married in there.
No honeymoon, though.
No honeymoon in there. A little small for the honeymoon. And then these are a couple of the other old phone booths.
A lot of you watching this may not be old enough to remember phone booths.
This booth in particular was the one actually that Johnny Depp got his very first acting call on. His agent called the restaurant here And it was in this booth that he took the call. And if you want to pan over this way, this is an old menu from 1926. However, the restaurant did open in 1919. This is the oldest menu that I know of. And if you look, and you look pretty closely here, you can see filet mignon was $1. And broiled lamb kidneys, which was Charlie Chaplin's favorite, was 75 cents. And one of the ideas we have when we turn 100 years, which is coming up very quick in about a little less than 4 years, is to have kind of an invite party where we roll back our prices to 1919 for one night.
I love that, John.
And then this is a picture of that old back room, the cocktail room, the writer's room, whatever you want to call it. This was the famous back room, which served the restaurant from actually 1934 until 1955. And so when we go into the new room, you'll see a lot of the same architecture and a lot of the same physical features. For instance, the coat racks that now exist on either end of the bar. These are the originals. The chandeliers are original from that old back room, but more importantly, the bar. And I don't know what happened to the headdress here, which is just beautiful. I wish we knew. But the bar itself is that original bar that I was speaking of, that the F. Scott Fitzgeralds, the Raymond Chandlers, and the Hemingways used to sit at. And this was the actual room that they did it in.
And now the stools in the new bar are screwed down because too many people were falling off them.
So let's take a really quick walk through the kitchen here. So this is probably one of your bigger kitchens that you're going to see in Los Angeles, and it's relatively huge for what kitchens are nowadays. And obviously we're not open today, so all of our plateware is here to be washed tomorrow morning before service. We'll be open on Tuesday. But this is the hotline back here. During service, we'll have four servers cooking back here. And we'll do anywhere on a Friday or Saturday night, we'll do 600 to 700 covers. So 4 cooks cranking it out. It's pretty amazing to watch. This is our pantry, so all the salads and cold dishes come out of here. And then let's take a real quick walk down here and see the grill. All of our steaks and chops come out of the dining room. And we cook over an open fire, over mesquite charcoal. We're cleaning up the ashes right now to get in service or prep for service tomorrow. But on an operating night, we've got a grill on there. There's charcoal, and the grill chef is cooking up, and he's got anywhere from 50 to 60 pieces of meat there on any given Friday or Saturday night, and he's just working that grill. And these are probably my 2 favorite seats in the whole restaurant, is to come here and watch the grill chef Indolfo cook. Indolfo, our grill chef, has been grilling here for 34 years, and there is not a better barbecue man in the city. So if you want to learn how to barbecue, here's where you come and sit. And so let's walk in through to the new room. And if you remember that photo we showed you in the hallway, this is a photo, or this is the new room that was a direct replica of that old back room. And so if you want to, to take a look at the chandeliers, those are the originals, the coat racks, and then more importantly, again, is the bar. This is the original bar, original wood. They have had to resurface the top, but everything else is original. And so you can still, to this day, come and sit at a bar that those old writers would sit at and get inspiration, or get drunk, fall off a bar stool, and collaborate with each other. You can still sit there, and we see writers to this day, whether they're screenwriters or novelists, they come in, they proofread, they bounce ideas back and forth off the bartender. So it's still very much a writer's restaurant, which is a neat legacy to have.
We're now seated at the famous bar at Musso and Frank. This is one of my favorite spots. They're known for their martinis. Esquire magazine has said it's the best martini in America. And the reason for that, I'm going to tell the secret, sorry, is these. Nice little flask. And inside is the rest of your martini, and it stays nice and cold. And you're never drinking a warm martini, and that's the Musso secret. Now I'd like to ask you, tell me your favorite story of Musso and Frank.
My favorite story would have to be my first memory of the restaurant. And it was when my grandmother was still alive and running the restaurant. It was probably 4, maybe 5. And her booth was booth 237, which sits on that wall. And I was having dinner with her, my mother, my sister. And I asked for a Shirley Temple. And my grandmother got up and she came to the bar and she brought me back a Shirley Temple in the same setup that you just described, and like the martini, and a side of cherries in a martini glass. And I thought I was so sophisticated, sitting there as a 4-year-old with my grandmother, who was drinking a real martini, but I was drinking a Shirley Temple out of a martini glass, and I just thought I was Mr. Hollywood at that point. That's my first memory, and therefore my favorite.
And coincidentally, the first thing I ever drank in Musso and Frank was a Shirley Temple. Well, I want to thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For having us in.
My pleasure.
It's always good to see you, my friend. This is table 11 in the new room. I sat in this chair when I was 12 years old, the very first night I ever came to Musso and Frank. My family had driven out from New York to California, and I, to this day, don't know why my father chose Musso and Frank. And it's the one question I still like to ask him. But I loved it, and I've been coming here ever since. So this is my first place, and I love it here. And there's one more table over here where, in 1976, I had the great honor of meeting Jimmy Stewart, my hero, who was, of course, just as nice as you would expect him to be. And that's my Musso story. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you again. Oh, no. Cut. It's no good. We'll have to do it again.